Picture this. The sun has not yet risen. You are standing in the fog, shield strapped to your arm, the iron grip of your gladius still cold from the night air. Around you, 15,000 Roman soldiers shuffle forward in the gray half-light, following the man who walks at the head of the column. Consul Gaius Flaminius, your commander, a man who has spent the better part of his career proving he answers to no one, not the Senate, not the gods, and certainly not his enemies. The road ahead curves along the northern bank of Lake Trasimene, squeezed between the dark shimmer of the water to your left and the hills rising steeply to your right. A natural corridor, a path carved by geography itself, and somewhere up ahead, through the mist that hangs so thick you can barely see the man in front of you, lies the Carthaginian army. You have been chasing them for weeks, through Etruria, through burned villages and ruined farmland, through smoke and grief. And now, finally, you have them. Or so you believe. You do not know what is hiding in those hills. You do not know that 40,000 soldiers are already in position, watching you march into the most perfect ambush ever set in the ancient world. You do not know that you are already dead. But this is not the battle they think they are fighting. By the end of this video, you will understand how one man read the mind of an entire Roman army, used the land itself as a weapon, orchestrated a trap so precise and so ruthless that it destroyed a consular army in under 4 hours, and in doing so, shook the Roman Republic to its foundations. You will understand why Lake Trasimene is not just a battle. It is a masterclass in deception, patience, and psychological warfare. And you will understand why Hannibal Barca was not simply a general. He was something Rome had never encountered before, and never truly recovered from finding. If you enjoy this kind of content, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. It genuinely helps, and we have many more stories like this one coming. To understand the full weight of what happened at Lake Trasimene in June of 217 BCE, you need to go back about a year. You need to understand who these two men were, what brought them to this moment, and why the ground beside that lake was soaked in Roman blood before the morning fog had even lifted. Hannibal Barca was the son of Hannibal Barca, the Carthaginian general who had fought Rome to a standstill in the First Punic War before being forced to accept a humiliating peace. The story, passed down through generations, was that young Hannibal had begged his father to take him on campaign, and Hamilcar had agreed only after making the boy swear an oath of eternal enmity toward Rome. Whether that story is literally true or embellished by time does not matter. What matters is the result. Hannibal grew up with one purpose, one direction, one enemy, and he spent his entire adult life preparing for the moment when he could strike that enemy at its heart. In 218 BCE, he did the unthinkable. He marched an army out of Carthaginian Spain, across southern Gaul, over the Alps during winter, and descended into northern Italy. It was a feat so audacious, so logistically insane, that Rome could barely process it was happening before Hannibal was already there, already winning. He crossed with roughly 100,000 soldiers and 37 war elephants. By the time he cleared the Alps, he had perhaps 26,000 fighting men left. The mountains had taken everyone else. The cold, the altitude, the ambushes from hostile Gallic tribes. He had lost the better part of his army before he even set foot on Italian soil. And he had kept going. In the autumn of 218 BCE, at the Ticinus River, Hannibal's cavalry crushed a Roman force and wounded the consul Scipio himself. Then in December, at the Trebia River, he annihilated another consular army. A Roman force of perhaps 40,000 men was shattered. Thousands drowned trying to flee. Thousands more were cut down. The Po Valley was now Hannibal's. Rome was stunned. But Rome was not broken. Rome never broke easily. In the spring of 217 BCE, the Republic elected 2 new consuls to deal with the Carthaginian threat. One was Gnaeus Servilius Geminus. Careful, methodical. The kind of man who understood that Hannibal needed to be contained, studied, handled with patience. The other was Gaius Flaminius. And Gaius Flaminius was none of those things. Flaminius was a populist, a man of the people who had built his career on defying the aristocratic Senate. He was brave in the way that men who do not fully understand danger are brave. Confident in the way that victory can make a man forget that he has never faced an opponent like this. The Senate, old and cautious, urged him to wait, to coordinate with Servilius, to not engage until the full force of Rome could be brought to bear. Flaminius ignored them. He marched south from Arretium in pursuit of Hannibal, who had swept through Etruria in a wide arc of destruction, burning, raiding, and specifically, deliberately, leaving the lands around Flaminius's own estates untouched. An insult designed to look like a favor, a whisper designed to make the Romans talk. And the Romans talked. They said Hannibal was showing favoritism. They said maybe Flaminius had made a deal. Flaminius, furious, felt the pressure. He had to move. He had to catch Hannibal. He had to prove himself. This is exactly what Hannibal wanted. The Carthaginian general had a gift that went far beyond tactics. He could read people. He could study an opponent from a distance, understand their psychology, their vanity, their fears, and build a battlefield designed not around geography alone, but around the enemy's own mind. He knew Flaminius was impulsive. He knew Flaminius was proud. He knew Flaminius would chase him. So Hannibal chose his ground with extraordinary care, and he laid a trap so elegant it almost looks like art. Lake Trasimene sits in Etruria, in what is today central Italy, south of modern-day Florence. In 217 BCE, it was larger than it is today, its northern shore pressing close against a line of steep, forested hills. The road from Arretium passed along a narrow corridor, maybe a mile wide at its widest, between the water and those hills. To enter the corridor from the east, you passed through a defile, a narrow gap in the terrain. To exit it to the west, you climbed over a ridge. In between was a flat stretch of lakeside ground, open, exposed, and completely surrounded on three sides by elevated terrain. If you were an army marching west along that road, the lake was on your left, the hills were on your right. You could not retreat easily to the north. You could not advance to the south. You were in a tube, a killing ground waiting for a lid to be placed on it. Hannibal placed the lid. He positioned his Gallic and Spanish infantry, his most reliable heavy foot, at the western end of the corridor, just past the exit ridge. They would be visible. They were the bait. They were what Flaminius would see when the fog lifted and think he had finally found the Carthaginian rearguard. Then Hannibal placed his African infantry and Spanish cavalry on the heights directly above the eastern entrance, the defile where the Roman column would funnel in. These men would seal the trap from behind the moment the Romans were fully inside. And then, hidden in the forests on the hillsides north of the road and stretching the full length of the corridor, he placed the rest. The Numidian cavalry, his Balearic slingers, more Gallic infantry. 40,000 men total, pressed into the forested hills, ordered to silence, ordered to stillness, ordered to wait. The evening before the battle, Hannibal watched the Roman army make camp near the eastern entrance to the corridor. He knew Flaminius would march at dawn. He knew the man's nature, and he knew that in the morning, a thick fog would rise off the lake and fill the corridor with near total blindness. Lake fogs in that region were common, heavy, disorienting. Hannibal had accounted for everything. He did not need his soldiers to see. They already knew their positions. The fog was not an obstacle. The fog was a weapon. Before first light, the Carthaginian soldiers were in position. The Gauls and Spanish at the western end, crouching behind the ridge. The cavalry and African infantry, hidden at the eastern entrance. The long line of ambush forces stretched silent across the hillsides in between. 40,000 men. Silent, watching, waiting for the column of Rome to walk in beneath them. And then the Romans woke up and started marching. There was almost no reconnaissance. Flaminius did not send scouts ahead in significant force. There are suggestions in the ancient sources that he did send some men forward, but in the fog they saw nothing conclusive. Or perhaps they did not look hard enough. Perhaps Flaminius did not want to wait. He wanted to close the distance with the enemy before Hannibal could escape again, before anyone back in Rome could accuse him of hesitating. So the column moved, 15,000 men in marching order, stretched along the road, funneling through the eastern defile into the corridor along the lake. The water was invisible in the fog to their left. The hills were invisible to their right. The men marched in the gray silence of early morning, and somewhere above them in the trees, 40,000 soldiers held their breath. The Roman column is now fully inside the trap. The vanguard has nearly reached the western ridge, where Hannibal's Gauls and Spaniards wait in plain sight, deliberately making themselves visible. The rear of the Roman column is still pushing through the eastern defile. The entire army is strung out along a mile or more of narrow lakeside road, unable to form battle lines, unable to maneuver. They are not a battle formation. They are a procession. Hannibal watches from the heights. He gives the signal. The hillside erupts. 40,000 soldiers come crashing down out of the forest and the fog simultaneously along the entire length of the Roman column. They are not attacking from one direction. They are attacking from everywhere, from above, from the flanks, from the rear. The Romans, still in marching formation, still half asleep, still adjusting to the light, suddenly find themselves struck on all sides by enemies they cannot see in fog they cannot see through. They advance, screaming, a wall of bodies pouring down the slopes. Javelins fall, slingers unleash, arrows cut through the mist. The Roman column shatters before it can even form up. Men who were marching a moment ago are now fighting for their lives with no idea where the attack is coming from, no idea where their officers are, no idea whether the man beside them is friend or enemy in the chaos and the fog. The noise is overwhelming, the screaming, the clash of weapons, the thunder of hooves as the Numidian cavalry crashes into the rear of the column and begins the work of cutting off any escape. The men at the back die trying to run back through the defile they just passed through. The men in the middle die where they stand, unable to advance, unable to retreat, unable to form any kind of organized resistance. The men at the front, the vanguard, 6,000 of them, actually manage to push through the ambush and break out over the western ridge. They will run for miles before stopping. They will later be captured, but they are the lucky ones. In the middle of the column, it is something that defies the word battle. Battle implies two organized forces in opposition. What is happening on the banks of Lake Trasimene is a slaughter. Roman soldiers are being killed faster than they can understand what is happening to them. Some try to form small defensive groups and are overwhelmed. Some try to wade into the lake and drown. Some throw down their weapons and are killed anyway. The fog prevents anyone from seeing far enough to understand the shape of the disaster. Every man is fighting in a pocket of chaos 10 yards wide, cut off from the whole, isolated in the noise and smoke and blood. Flaminius tries. You have to grant him that. Whatever else the man was, he was not a coward. He rides through the carnage, shouting orders, trying to rally his men, trying to do something with an army that has ceased to exist as a coherent fighting force. He finds small clusters of soldiers and throws them at the enemy. He charges, he leads, he fights. And then a Gallic horseman named Ducarius, who claimed to recognize Flaminius from a previous campaign in which the consul had ravaged his tribe's territory, drives through the press of bodies and cuts him down from his horse. The Roman consul falls dead in the mud beside the lake he underestimated. The battle does not end immediately with the consul's death. It never does. Men go on fighting out of momentum, out of fear, out of the purely animal refusal to accept that it is over. But it is over. The Romans fight in fragments for another 2 hours, the ancient sources say, and then the resistance simply dissolves. Men surrender in groups. Men are hunted down at the water's edge. Men who tried to swim the lake are caught or drowned. By the time the fog finally lifts and the morning sun touches the water of Trasimene, the field belongs entirely to Hannibal. 15,000 Romans are dead. Thousands more are captured. The numbers vary by source, but the scale is not in doubt. This was not a defeat. This was an annihilation. An entire consular army gone in a single morning, in under 4 hours, in a space so narrow they could never once fight back effectively. Hannibal's losses were modest. A few thousand men, mostly from the Gallic contingents who bore the brunt of the fighting in the confused close-quarters press. For every Carthaginian who died that morning, roughly 5 or 6 Romans died with him. That ratio tells you everything about the nature of what happened. This was not a fair fight that happened to go one way. This was an execution, planned in every detail, carried out with the precision of a man who had studied his enemy so thoroughly that the enemy's destruction was already written before a single sword was drawn. In Rome, the news arrived through a praetor named Pomponius, who stood before the assembled people and delivered one of the most starkly honest disaster reports in Roman history. He did not soften it. He did not contextualize. He said simply, "We have been badly defeated in a great battle." The city fell into something approaching panic. And then, because Rome was Rome, the panic curdled into resolve. The Senate appointed a dictator, Quintus Fabius Maximus, a man who had precisely the opposite temperament from Flaminius. Fabius understood what Flaminius had not. You do not fight Hannibal on his terms. You shadow him. You cut his supply lines. You bleed him slowly. You deny him the pitched battle he wants. This strategy would earn Fabius the nickname Cunctator, the Delayer. His fellow Romans would mean it as an insult. History would recognize it as a compliment of the highest order. But Fabius would not last. Rome's patience was finite. Its pride was vast. And 16 months after Lake Trasimene, a new set of consuls would take the field against Hannibal with an army of 80,000 men, the largest Rome had ever assembled, determined to end this nightmare in a single decisive engagement. They would march to a place called Cannae, and what Hannibal would do to them there would make Lake Trasimene look like a preliminary exercise. The genius of Lake Trasimene, what makes it worth understanding beyond the body count and the tactical detail, is what it reveals about the mind that conceived it. Hannibal did not simply find good ground and hide his army in the hills. He engineered the entire sequence of events that put the Roman army on that ground, in that condition at that moment. He raided Etruria in a specific pattern to provoke Flaminius's sense of honor. He moved at a specific pace to keep the Romans chasing but never quite catching. He timed his approach to Trasimene to give him exactly enough time to position 40,000 soldiers in total silence and complete concealment before dawn. He understood Roman psychology well enough to know that Flaminius would not scout thoroughly, would not wait, would not do the slow, careful things that survival required. And he built a plan that depended not on his enemy being stupid, but on his enemy being exactly as proud, as impatient, and as politically pressured as he calculated they would be. This is what separates Hannibal from most commanders in history. Not just the technical skill, not just the physical courage, but the cognitive warfare. The ability to fight a battle in the mind before a single soldier moved, to construct a reality for his enemy and lead them into it, step by step, until the moment of destruction came, and they had no idea it had been coming. The Romans would eventually beat Hannibal. 15 years after Lake Trasimene, Scipio Africanus would carry the war to North Africa and defeat the great Carthaginian at the Battle of Zama. But they would beat him not by meeting him on his terms, but by learning from everything he taught them at rivers and lakes and plains across Italy. They would beat him by becoming something they had not been before they met him. And that transformation had its beginning, in a very real sense, in the fog beside Lake Trasimene, where an entire army walked into a man's imagination and never walked out. The soldiers who died that morning were not cowards. They were not fools. They were Roman legionaries, among the finest heavy infantry their civilization had ever produced. They died because they were led by a man whose pride was larger than his caution, into a trap built by someone who may have been the greatest military mind of the ancient world. The fog was real, but the real blindness was already there before the sun rose. Flaminius lies in the mud. The lake is red at the edges. The hills are quiet again. And Hannibal looks down from the ridge, breathing the morning air, watching the smoke and the stillness settle over what had been an army, and thinks about what comes next. Because he was always thinking about what comes next. And what comes next is Cannae. 16 months away, 80,000 Romans, 2 consuls. And a maneuver so perfect in its geometry, so complete in its destruction, that military academies still study it today as the definition of total battlefield annihilation. The Romans thought that after Lake Trasimene, they understood what Hannibal was capable of. They were wrong. They had not seen anything yet. The trap at Trasimene was built around terrain and fog and one man's predictable vanity. What Hannibal would build at Cannae needed none of that. No fog, no hills, no corridor. Just open ground, a plan of breathtaking simplicity, and an enemy so desperate to end the war that they walked into the most complete encirclement ever executed in ancient warfare. Watch what happens when Hannibal fights without the hills. Watch what he does in the open, against twice as many enemies, with nothing to hide behind but mathematics and the cold, precise genius that made him the most dangerous man who ever marched against Rome. The next battle will change everything.